Okay, well, welcome everyone to the talk, Preparing Youth and Adults to Work Across Differences in Pursuit of a Safer Climate. There's a quote from the prophet Micah that I learned about from a nonprofit near me, Ecumenical Ministries of Oregon. Do justice, love mercy, walk humbly. I try to make this one of the inspirations for my work, along with this beautiful photo from my brother. Also want to acknowledge our sponsors today. Really appreciate all that they've done to make this possible. The do justice part is what I'm all about. This is me after one of our trainings on the natural high that happens when I bring people together from across the community to work together on climate. Love mercy is something I think we need to do when the going gets hard, so that we can forgive others and hope they will forgive us when conflicts arise. I've had a big month on that, actually. We'll get to that. And the walk humbly part is part of how we get the job done of getting climate action at the speed that the current situation requires. Mind you, not walk or speak quietly, but with humility, doing our best to understand other people's perspectives and situations. I'm going to start with a story. I am a storyteller, and then outline what we do at Climate Change Recovery, or CCR, our accomplishments, and some of the lessons we've learned that you can immediately put to work in your own efforts. I will also share with you some of the ups and downs of this journey of doing non-faith, interfaith work that seeks to bring together people of all ages, Muslims, Jews, Christians, liberal and conservative, members of the LGBTQ community, and businesses. So let me tell you a story of me and my family. Once there was a young woman, or maybe she was a girl in those days, who was worried that people across the world were busy destroying their own home, the earth, without really paying attention to what was going on or trying to stop it. But she reassured herself that the problem was super fixable. She eventually got married. More about that in a minute. One Mother's Day, many years later, she celebrated her first Mother's Day as a mother. Over the course of the previous year, she'd adopted her two children, one through the court in the Republic of the Marshall Islands, the other from Chicago, her daughter, Asian Pacific Islander, her son, African American. At around the time they turned 11 and 12, she realized that in fact people were effectively not acting to stop global warming. And not only was her son from a particularly vulnerable population, her daughter came from a country that was only about 7 feet above sea level. 7 feet. The time to act was now, and I, needed to find a way to do this with kids in tow in a way that would empower them so that they too could stick up for their future. At that time, there was very little involvement of kids and people of color in environmental organizations. There was only the beginnings of talk about something called climate justice. And so I set out to change that with the help of my kids. The work we do at CCR is focused on helping to diversify the climate movement and using that diversity of all types to strengthen it. Justice, equity, and diversity and inclusion are at the center of everything I do and really who I am. In addition to my daughter and my son enriching our lives through giving me extra reasons to connect to other communities, my tendency toward boundary crossing came from my parents, the local Methodist church I grew up in, and perhaps the Sephardic heritage I didn't know about until recently. You might have already guessed this from the center picture. When I married someone who was Jewish, who's been supportive of all these efforts, my parents and my church helped me to be married under the chuppah they made. Many years later, I chose to become Jewish and fought to stay connected to my Christian traditions. Another not easy path, but my Christmas tree and Hanukkah shared their light with each other, even as I prepared to become a bat mitzvah. In 2012, I was ordained as a Magidah with the blessing of Rabbi Zalman Schachter Shalomi. And as you may know, a Magidah is a traditional path in Judaism, comparable to a rabbi, different, parallel, a path focused on preaching through storytelling. We started Climate Change Recovery, now a 501c3, and I created a training called Youth and Adults Acting for Earth, YAY for short, initially combined with my leading the US delegation of the UN-sponsored, youth-led nonprofit Plant for Planet. A major focus of our work is bringing people together from many backgrounds to address the threat to our people's joint existence and that of all our relatives. This approach is essential for success, and I love the focus of this conference on this topic. My belief is that we as humans have a responsibility to the greatest extent possible to protect our relatives of other species, each other, and future generations from the dangers of a climate crisis, nuclear power, and weapons, and other toxics. In order to do this, it's essential to make the climate movement more inclusive and help people who may feel opposed to each other on some ways to work together on it. Challenging? Yes. Impossible? No. My background in sociology, particularly social psychology and public policy, which may not seem relevant to some people as far as climate work, but I knew from my background how important this is. Is the audio okay? I just heard someone try to cut in. Okay, just make it sure. So social psychologist Elliot Aronson designed the Chickasaw classroom approach as a way to reduce racial conflict among school children, promote better learning, improve student motivation, and improve the learning experience. His work is one of the key inspirations for our YAY trainings. My goal, as you might have guessed in the acronym, is to create trainings and experiences that are fun, even while increasing knowledge about climate science, the climate crisis, and climate justice. Not only that, but to bring people together from many communities and across the generations, as this is essential for the success of the climate movement. Our explicit focus is bringing people together focused on this topic, but quietly breaking down barriers between the groups by helping them work together, even while they're increasing their knowledge. We've empowered over 500 youth and adults in 5 states and 3 countries. Even though many of our trainings have happened in Oregon, a state that has only 25% people of color, over 75% of the leaders we've trained are people of color. You might be wondering how I, in spite of my European American Christian Jewish background, have engaged such a high percentage of people of color and have significant partnerships with Muslims and other communities of color. A lot of our success has to do with my very determined outreach approach I'll talk about in a minute. The first training, however, got a good kick in the right direction because we were asked by a Presbyterian lay minister to do a training in conjunction with a summer camp he was helping to organize around the theme of Abraham's tent with my congregation, Panay Or Jewish Renewal of Portland, and the local Ahmadiyya Muslim community and his own church. This is image from the morning before our training. One could say that the difficult conversation started from the beginning as well. I sat there and listened during the planning process to a Jewish leader and a Christian leader talking about which was the better environmental biblical story for younger kids. I'm going to skip over the details, but I'll let you think about what they probably discussed. They were arguing between whether it was better to tell kids about Adam and Eve or the story of Noah. Neither are easy stories. But the good thing about the climate crisis is that we know we are able to clearly stop the harm that we are causing. So this first training back in 2015 had students and leaders who were Muslim, Christian, and Jewish from Middle Eastern, European, African, Asian, Latino, and Marshallese backgrounds. Beginning with that training, our outreach has often started in the Muslim community and other communities of color, and we've reached groups as diverse as Native Americans, migrant farm worker families, LGBTQ folks, people who reside in the US through special work visas, and Marshallese immigrants to the US. My thinking is that if you want to create collaborations, going to those leaders and communities with whom you'd like to work is a lot more effective than holding an event and hoping some of them will come. Similarly, I've done a lot of outreach to schools by working events, going first to families with children, because traditionally they have been very underrepresented in the climate movement, and to people of color. So these are images from our trainings. They, with the exception of the one in the upper right-hand corner, which was the Juliana rally on Get2Know Bit in DC last year. So these range from California to Oregon to Pennsylvania. And the training itself is led by yay leaders, people who have already gone through the training. Like in a jigsaw classroom, you might walk in and be assisted and led by someone from a group whose members you've never really had a significant interaction with before. But when you're relying on and receiving help from someone about whom you might have negative preconceptions, it can break apart those preconceptions and break down other barriers too. In the case of our trainings, you might not only be taught by someone from a different ethnic or religious group, you might also get to learn the power and wisdom of a leader younger than you, maybe by 20 years or more. Since we often work with students as young as fourth grade, people might think that we make the climate crisis sound less scary, but that's not the case. We are very clear about the seriousness of this situation. It's not a matter of caring for future generations. It can be a matter of ensuring there are any. Nevertheless, people come away from our trainings, as you can see in these pictures, with comments like, "That was fun, thanks." Now, I know most of us don't necessarily associate climate work or the climate crisis and fun, but we do our best to make that magic happen. And one of the things that when we work with these groups, we see across whoever background they have is this paralyzing fear that people have over what's happening. By helping people to work together, we overcome some of this as well as bring people together. It is why learning to have difficult and mutually affirming conversations is really, really important. We are only now formally collecting information on religious identification, since it took a little bit extra nerve to ask this as part of registration. But the most recent training we organized with Cool Islam, which is this one in the bottom right corner, we know had students and leaders who were Jewish, Muslim, Hindu, Quaker, and likely other Christian denominations as well. So let's talk about how these folks find their way into our trainings. 5 of the key approaches I've used are focus on reaching and empowering people who are different than you and whose voices may not be being heard. Collect data. Create partnerships with organizations serving those groups that you're hoping to try to reach. And pay attention to all types of diversity, as well as work to create a welcoming environment. This, by the way, is the group from that first training that you saw gathered around the Torah a moment ago. Focus on reaching out to people and serving people of color. Again, that's that training I just mentioned with Cool Islam and the leaders. Some of these leaders I'm going to be talking about in a little bit. So when you empower people of color as leaders, supporting their development and training of others, it's very important. And if you're leading a Jewish organization, that can mean focusing extra effort on Jews of color as well as non-Jews of color. And when I talk about diversity, I might refer to people of color, but keep in mind that goes across all these different types of groups that I've talked about. Second, collect data to measure impact on the importance of things that you're most interested in doing. So if, for example, ethnic diversity or age diversity is important, make sure you're collecting that data, because if you don't have it, you won't know how you're doing. You'll only be able to guess. I make these questions required part of the signing up, ethnicity and the rest. I gave you lots of options. You can choose multiple blanks. You can fill in information. I've had some wonderful responses on those, but it's really important to be able to have that information. My first responses to when we instituted the question on religion have been so cool that I think maybe next time I'll have nerve enough to let people, if they want, to offer information about their LGBTQ position. So, sorry, I'm leaning on the slides. There we go. So creating partnerships with organizations or serving people of color. Did I mention that cold calling, emailing, all that kind of stuff, social media, these are important skills for this work? Sometimes I'm able to get friends and family to put me in touch with folks, but often I do some quick internet research and put the shy part of myself aside and call someone. One of my favorite stories about a time when I did that was I was doing planning a training for the San Francisco Bay Area, and I decided I wanted to have a Native American leader as one of our VIP speakers. Didn't know anyone in the Bay Area, so I Googled, found a great organization with an awesome looking leader, and I called them up and asked to speak to him. They put me through, and he was very nice, but he seemed really distracted when after I explained what I had called for. And he said, "Could you call me back later today? I'm expecting a call from the president." This was in 2022. And I said, "Of course." And I hung up really fast. We had a great conversation later that day, and he agreed to be a speaker for the training in Milkland. Also, pay attention to all types of diversity. This means that, like, make sure you're not preaching to the choir. Try to engage both those people who are feeling worried and have little knowledge about climate science and those who are already committed activists, because the two will strengthen each other in their work. And then be prepared to be welcoming and create an inclusive, welcoming environment. I at one point received an email back from a teenager I had reached out to see if they wanted to lead an upcoming training. That email let me know that their pronouns were they, now they, them, and they have a new name. This story, I think, says a lot about how my heart comes across to the people I work with. Though we're not explicitly focused on LGBTQ issues, I was glad to receive such a lovely email that showed that they trusted that I would understand and support them. If you'd like to learn more about these kinds of outreach techniques, there's an article on my LinkedIn page I can share with you later. So one important thing to keep us going when the going gets tough is to remember that we're creating ripple effects. There's 3 big effects that have come out of this work that I would never have expected going in. Back in 2015, my kids both agreed to make a short speech at the Portland Eco Film Festival in conjunction with a film showing about the work of Our Children's Trust. It turned out that the person who made this connection for us was wrong, and it was actually a panel discussion. And the person, so both my kids were really not happy with me about this. I got major glares, and somehow my son went up on the stage totally unprepared with a bunch of adults. Everybody else in the panel was fully an adult, not 11 years old. Before long, both had been invited to become plaintiffs in the federal youth climate lawsuit, Julian et al. V. US. In this picture with all the kids, you'll see Miko in the blue dress in the center. Isaac is harder to find, but you'll see plenty. Oh yeah, he's right behind the person to Miko's left as we face her, who, by the way, is the daughter of Jim Hansen, granddaughter of Jim Hansen. And so we fought this fight with 4 administrations, starting with President Obama, nearly 10 years, just to get the courts to acknowledge our right to a sustainable climate, one capable of sustaining human life. But in the end, it stopped. But they hung in for 10 years and got some amazing wins. There's the 21 plaintiffs again. You may know about the Japanese internment. We know that laws are not necessarily just. These are some pictures from the opportunity we had to visit my daughter's birth country and meet the president and see how beautiful and how vulnerable it is. Whoops, sorry. This was us in DC for the Juliana rally, trying to get Biden's attention before everything went down and we got in a way worse situation than we probably could have imagined. These is, you can look up this all online. These are some of the key rights that lawsuit was about. These are some of the amazing decisions. Again, we never went to trial, but we had multiple judgments that affirmed our rights and that the courts have really messed up. As Miko pointed out, though, these obstacles have been compensated for to some extent by the wins that we've seen. There is a legal movement spreading across the world that comes out of the Juliana movement. In fact, you may know of a young girl named Greta who took her inspiration from this as well. The health case won, Montana settled out of court, and by some miracle of stamina, my kids and another plaintiff are now part of a new federal lawsuit, Lighthizer v. Trump, addressing many of the things that is going wrong that are going wrong at the moment. And on top of that, Nico and I are working on the effort in Oregon for the Green Amendments for the Generations. This is going across the country. I'll let you look more into it later, but there is a very active group starting up in Massachusetts. So I urge you to check it out, as well as many other states. Some other organizations worth checking out too is Environmental Voter Project. And if you scan this QR code, you will get to see a really cool video later that I highly recommend. So now for the hard part of the story. I have two stories to tell about recent challenges. I'm going to scoot by. Yeah, we'll just leave it on. Yeah, let's leave it on this for now. Both were very difficult, but the work is worth. I kind of stumbled into both of them. So dive in. About a month ago, I found out I needed to find a venue for an electrification presentation we were doing and for the upcoming YAY training. And as our regular sponsor was too strapped to be able to fund the usual venue. So I got a tip from a fellow climate activist about a rather conservative Christian church that had been known to offer its space for climate and indivisible events. I met with a pastor. It went really well, and I was excited to finally be able to do outreach for these events. Then a Jewish leader who had been part of the negotiations indicated they didn't think I should be partnering with this church at all, because someone who was part of the talks felt that the pastor was not enthusiastically welcoming of LGBTQ folks. Suddenly I found myself stuck trying to figure out how to make the Jewish congregation and others feel that I was serious about supporting trans and other LGBTQ people, whether to find another venue or put in extra work to make sure this one would be welcoming. And knowing the importance, not always a popular view, but knowing the importance of honoring the Christian congregation's openness to being involved in climate work. We really do need everybody. We can't rule somebody out, is my feeling, even if we disagree with them on certain things. And it's not always easy to do that, but I try. So in the end, I did work out a solution, but it was not an easy process, I will say. Now for the second and last story. And then I would love to hear any thoughts and questions that you might have. Sometimes you have to let go of something you want to do when there's not enough time to make it happen in a way that works well for all involved. Sometimes you might think you're being really sensitive in how you interact with someone. Anyone who's been a parent probably knows this. And it turns out that it's not enough. When that happens, I will try to do my best to pick up the pieces and protect the relationship in a way that's still honest to my own integrity. This happened recently, right after the other story. I think I'm going to go back to a couple of those slides. There's one in particular I just want to bring up for inspiration. So forgive the back up one. This will work. So I'm going to begin with an acknowledgement that I may upset friends and attendees by referring to a particular region by the name of Israel-Palestine. I ask from my heart that you hear this story from yours. It seems we have a lot of work to do on this subject, and I know I can only contribute in a small way. This way I first heard about the events of October 2023 in Israel-Palestine probably also says a lot about me. I saw a comment on Instagram from one of our YAY leaders who appeared to be excited in a positive way, like they thought it was a cool thing that was happening. That's probably cool is not the word, so I apologize. Again, I do not mean to offend. But the tone was like, great, finally. This is hard for me to say. It was hard for me to see that post because the events before, during, and after that month had broken my heart. But it was a tiny consolation that I had connections to Muslims as well as Jews who are active on this issue. It took me what felt like forever to reach out to her and to another active YAY leader who I knew she was close friends with. Although our initial messaging was very gentle and that went okay, When I used the phrase Israel Palestine with one of the young women, maybe with both, I realized that what I saw as an inclusive phrase with hope for a future of two states working cooperatively for a better future, in stark contrast to the action of Hamas and the current excuse for an Israeli government, the Israeli Palestinian equivalent of Trump's well in progress takeover of the US one. It was at least the case that at least two of my Muslim friends saw it as an inappropriate way to refer to that land. With the first, she and I managed to get on the phone with each other. And though I thought she would agree, I think she would agree that the first part of the conversation felt pretty tense. I don't even remember if I used Israel only or Israel Palestine. But I was glad to hear her say that she still believes in the cause, as she puts it, and wants to work on climate with me when she's more free. This happens to be, by the way, week of graduation for everybody I know, so it's been hard to get a co-presenter. With the second friend, perhaps my first mistake had been trying to talk via messaging. We were so busy and couldn't meet in person. Because I do feel that in-person discussion is best for these kinds of difficult things. But I had hoped to have her speak with me today, and so I kept messaging because of our schedules. My daughter ended up helping me to find the words I needed to help mend that relationship. I admit to having to think through how to better proceed in the future. This is going to require more thought on my point, to be honest. I messaged my friend. I want people to feel welcome and included, and it wasn't my intention for you to feel uncomfortable. She responded, "You did make me feel uncomfortable. Don't worry. It's the concept of calling Palestine, Israel Palestine, is what causes this feeling. I appreciate you reaching out to me. I had thought that making sure to call that land Israel Palestine and mention an author whose perspective is appreciated by many Jews and Muslims as well was enough, but it wasn't. That was just the story of three people. I can tell you of folks with very different perspectives, but I hope in each case we can meet each other where we are and find ways to better understand each other and work together to prevent the harms of all types that are happening all around us. Like any relationship, there are challenges in the work I am doing, but I urge and bless you to do your best with it also, and to not shrink from the challenges, however understandable it may be, to want to do that sometimes. So now I'd love to have you share any questions and thoughts you have. And I don't know, in the previous session I was in, which was amazing, by the way, you need to see the video about the Arava Institute on video later.
Well, while everybody else is fumbling around a bit, I just really want to thank you. You really touched my heart very deeply. I also work in very challenging and sensitive aspects of outreach, and it's been very inspiring.
I'm so glad. This is kind of heartbreaking what happened because I had a presenter and we're all set, and then I just shared the name of my Rabbi Merkel Lerner's book, and but it's a good book, and whoops, that's his lip. Representative Keith Ellison, the first Muslim U.S. representative to Congress, thinks it's a pretty dang good book too. Although I'm about ready to write him and ask him what he thinks now. Maybe he's changed, but he was a big fan too.
What's the title of the book you're referring to?
It's called Embracing Israel Palestine, Israel/Palestine. And he recently passed, and I got to hear him speak when he came to our area. So did my kids. My daughter's graduating this week, so unfortunately I couldn't wrangle her into co-presenting either.
Well, I appreciate your comments. I'm sitting here in Minnesota, and I actually work with the League of Women Voters in Minnesota and in Napa in California. And the kid who's the coordinator of our program is the president of her climate action program in Napa, and she's going to go to Stanford next year.
That's wonderful.
So I've had connections with the Haas Center at Stanford, and it's just nice to see that tuning into something in Massachusetts. I was born in Boston. Um, that there are the interconnections all over the country, and that we have a group of kids here in our temple in Minneapolis and St. Paul that are working with the Interfaith Council to try to develop more climate action activities. So it's just it's nice to see that there are activities all over the country.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing. Yeah, I didn't go into the lawsuits much, but definitely check out Our Children's Trust page. What essentially happened was they fought Juliana and unfortunately teamed up with the oil companies and the manufacturing companies, the people who want you to have plastic around your apples, and fought successfully. But there are lawsuits going on in most states. So check out your state. And um, you said Minnesota, right?
Yeah, I'm in Minnesota, yes.
I just checked on Minnesota because that's where my nephew and new niece and grand, whatever they call the next generation, are. And they're really interested in the green amendments. And there's not one there yet, but I know they would love to team up with other folks. So you're always welcome to email me or find me on social media. But there are events, see if I can remember, there are green amendments efforts going on in Wisconsin, noticeably absent in the Dakotas. Someone needs to kick that off. But Wisconsin and Michigan, as well as Massachusetts. And those are amazing. And since you mentioned Napa, I might have to jump in with one other story. There's too many pictures for me to even know which to share. So I'm just going to share this one, which is pretty sweet. So we did a training in the Napa area, Sebastopol. This was hosted by Solar Schoolhouse. We brought a team from Oregon down to lead. The person, the red shirt on the left, is actually my friend from college who helped organize it. This was in 2017, and I never, at that time, I was a little worried about what was happening to my daughter's birth country. Well, okay, more than a little worried. But it never occurred to me to be scared of Napa. So we had a great time. We did the traditional thing you may know of, that there's a long-standing Jewish tradition that poor travelers can stay overnight in a synagogue. So I did my random calling. I called up some person I never met, who turns out to be like somebody's cousin. And now I know he has all these connections with me. But I just called him up and said, yeah, so I want to bring a van load of people down to lead a climate training. Can we sleep on the floor of your synagogue? They put us up. We slept on the stage. Longer story, the stage where like Joni Mitchell and other people had performed, which is now the Bima. And we left behind some challah for them. And my daughter presented about the Marshall Islands. We did our training the next day. As we were driving back, we stopped for gas because you kind of have to these days. And my son thought this was hysterical, filmed it, unfortunately lost the film. But as I tried to open the door, this is going somewhere, I promise you, tried to open the door to the van, it completely knocked me off my feet. Like I barely stayed. The wind was so strong. And we were all thinking, whoa, this is trippy and kind of cool and wild. Well, the next morning, that woman I pointed out, Beth, my friend from college, wrote me, and when your email says the subject line is "we're okay," it's never a good sign. I opened it up, and that was how I learned that Napa and Sonoma had been devastated by wildfires.
Yeah.
They started about 6 hours after we left town.
Mm.
And we had driven all night to get back to Oregon. So the synagogue, everybody, the challah stayed in the freezer for a couple weeks till they could get back in. But yeah, it's everywhere. And like, don't anybody thinks they're protected, they're just being nice.
No, Napa's have a lot of fires, and my daughter is actually on the board for the temple there, Congregation Beth Shalom, and their rabbi is very active, and so hopefully they're going to be more involved in things too. So
yeah, that's great.
Well, thank you.
And yet, yeah, Amy.
So I didn't realize this was like a smaller, intimate group. So I'm from the Bay Area, friends with
Nice.
Dad. Yeah, and I don't want to thank you. This is just a great thing to start my Sunday off with. Really amazing and inspiring. And I'm originally from New York, and my temple was called Or Elohim. So this is just such an interesting day for me. Um, your stories about the Israel-Palestine verbiage and your Muslim friends. I don't want to take this in too much of a different direction, and so we don't have to talk about it. But my question about the Israel Palestine and the interpersonal rifts that stop progress. These are male. I work in feminism. I do feminist art. These are masculine male. These are Hamas is run by men. Israel right now is run by men. These are male. This is male BS that everybody else is straitjacketed into. You know, and so I'm getting to a productive place here. I'm wondering
I
if
think
there
what you're
are,
saying is productive. I'm sad that I feel it's true, but I think there's,
when
yeah,
people ask
I'm
me
a
about,
sociologist. What can I say?
yeah, I mean, when people ask me about the Israel, Israel Hamas, I'm like, these are just, you know, ill, deviant men with power, and the rest of us are caught up in their psychodrama. And
Mm.
so I'm wondering if are there like feminist groups where women are, and non-toxic men, put it that way, are coming up with alternative ways of relating, of language, is there anything alternative going on that's not operating within, like that understands that the problem is way bigger than two countries? Does that make sense?
Yeah. And I definitely want to urge you all to listen to the talk earlier because he mentioned at least one group that I'm not going to sum it up right now, although I know them well. Women Waging Peace, I want to say, which is a collaboration of Jews and Muslims, I believe, from Israel, Palestine. And I mean, that's a good example. And I appreciate the way you phrased for men because there's so many amazing men like my husband and my son who are different. And I also understand that someone listening to this talk may feel like what you said is super unfair and that they are out those male leaders are absolutely right. And I think that's part of it is just and that's where I do like the book, even if it got me in a lot of trouble, Embracing Israel Palestine, because he really lays it on the line. He talks about the whole history, about the trauma of both sides, and how that trauma keeps reinforcing each other and how we can break it.
By
And he
men.
makes
Sorry, but
really
by
clear,
men. By men.
yeah,
Trauma
although
reinforces by
unfortunately,
men.
plenty of women reinforce it,
Well,
you
they
know.
follow. They follow what the men. They follow men. They
Well,
follow them.
I wish, yeah, I'm afraid, let's just say some of them will push men out of the
But
way.
whatever.
Holly,
If we
yeah,
don't,
no,
if
well,
we don't,
hopefully we'll have some good conversations. I have a bad sense of humor, so I tell people that when I talk to God and I ask her uh, why the world is in such bad shape, and they say her, I said, yeah, God is a she. Uh, and that's why in the Jewish religion we talk so much about peace and turning the plowshares into or turning rifles into plowshares. Um, so I think in the positive thing that as women have more power, that they'll be able to exercise more peace in the programs that I work with, as I say, in Napa and in Minnesota. They're all led by young people. In fact, the program in Minnesota is led by a young Muslim student, and there's a whole Muslim group of kids, all female, that are working on these projects. So I think uh, that despite the last few elections, where I think there was kind of a male bias, that women are going to be more uh, outspoken, and that will hopefully prevail in terms of
yeah,
doing the
good
things.
point.
I actually worked
And
in
I want to
Gaza.
give and forgive me, I'm going to have you pause for a minute, Rob. I don't know how long we can go over without getting ourselves in trouble, but I know Holly's had her hand up, and I just saw your comment about you live in the Santa Cruz Mountains. Yeah, and I went to UC Santa Cruz and Stanford, in case you haven't figured that out yet, and Princeton. So
Yeah, I sort of had that feeling. So, with all, I get to the point of affection and respect to everybody here, because I can honestly say affection. So, first of all, I have the feeling that the Holy One of Blessings is probably gender fluid and uses the they them pronouns. But that aside, what I want to say about particularly Amy's question and comment, so I work in an area of climate action that hasn't even really hit the radar screen of the climate action folks, which is that I do what is euphemistically known as green burial, although I don't prefer to speak of it that way. And what I've come to understand as a result of that is the incredible environmental damage that is done every time a cremation takes place. And I started counting on one hand, and then I had to get out my other hand. So the deeper I look, the more reasons why I find. And I get very discouraged sometimes, but what I've decided to do is to hold for myself, Madame Magid, the story of working out, setting up base camp out in the wilderness, and trusting that the people who are fighting the good fight back on the streets, when they finally get to the point of being out in the wilderness, there will be those of us who have already set up base camp and are trying to live different lives and act differently, so that when the dominant paradigm does indeed collapse, which it will do under its own weight, there are those of us who have been developing tools and practices for the new paradigm. And so I would really encourage all of us to find that thing that you want to be held in the future and start practicing it now.
Thank you, Holly. One thing I didn't talk much about was the steps in the training. We've been doing them only in person, and I would love to go to spread across the country. What I need is someone who loves being the administrative end of an executive director, because my love is the program part and
me too,
making all this happen. But one of the things we really stress in the trainings, and I want to stress here, is that anything you can do I totally understand your feelings. Anything you can do collaboratively, system-wide, is really key, because the individual stuff, it does definitely matter. In fact, I was horrified to learn after my parents had both passed about cremation and how awful that is. They would never have done that if they'd had that kind of information. No way would we have done that. But you've really got to think systemic effects. So, for example, get the state to allow for green burial. We've got now Washington a composting facility where you can bring yourself, so to speak, have yourself be brought there and be turned into compost. But that has to happen on the state level or the national level to get those laws in place. And there are other types of green burial, but that's just a good example of one. What you're going to find, and it's going to come out, I'm quite convinced, is that part of what's happening right now is that, for lack of a better term, we'll call them the right, is working to increase anti-Semitism, increase anti-Muslim feelings, and turn all you climate folks against each other. What? You're not vegetarian? What? You tell me you use a plastic straw? Make you fight among each other so that we won't be able to effectively muster the opposition we need to what was just referred to as the dominant paradigm. So I want to bless you all to be able to go out there and see what you want to see changed, and find friends and have fun and get it done. Here's my shirt, by the way. It's just, that's the way it's going to happen. And I may eventually get courage enough to do more trainings online. But if you ever find you want to come this way, let me know and we'll try to time things. I can find homes synagogues or actual homestays for folks, but the trainings have been really amazing. This last month was kind of a mess because everything that happened led to the only time we've ever had to cancel a training. But I'm hopeful that we'll be doing, we decide to just postpone so we had better timing. It's also, like I said, graduation week, not the best time probably. Well, thank you everybody for coming.
Thank you so
I
much.
just want to say,
end, oh,
I just want to bless you and say thank you very much. And God willing, we're in the messiest part of the fractal right now.
Right. And thank you for bringing everyone together.
Yeah.
Thank you.
thank you all so much.
Very inspiring.
Very inspiring.
Yeah, and I would love it if you did find me on social media and shared the. I don't know how that's going to work, so I apologize if I'm saying something I'm not supposed to. But share this talk with other folks because I think we all need that hope we were just talking about, and it's really, really easy to just feel like you're not going to get it.